So a little bit about Real Story Group. If you're not familiar with us, you may be your first webinar that you're on. We do two main things in our business. First thing we do is we write and publish research, and that research is very focused on the selection process and the vendor marketplaces. So we look at different marketplaces across different technology areas, and we do a lot of consumer-based research where we analyze the weaknesses and strengths of the different technology choices and options that you have. In really two domains, digital workplace and digital marketing. So today we're focused specifically on digital marketing technologies and the weakness and strengths of the tools and vendors in that domain. We also have a consulting practice, which specifically is focused on technology strategy, product and vendor selection. So if you are going down a path of deciding what kind of technology you need and then selecting it, that's exactly what we do. We also help companies understand what their total cost of ownership will be. We also help with implementation best practices and guidance along the way. So if you are thinking about any of these things, please do feel free to let us know. Many of you might be familiar with our digital workplace and marketing technology vendor map. We used to call it the content technology vendor map, but we more specifically have honed in on these two particular areas of enterprise technology. So we have multiple technology areas that we cover, as I mentioned, and those are represented by the different lines on this map. And each of the lines focus and list the different vendors that really play in these different markets. So you'll note that, of course, the big household names that you've surely all heard of, such as IBM and Adobe, Microsoft, Google, Oracle, these are big vendors that have lots of different technologies across the digital workplace and across marketing technology. Whereas the vendors that appear only on one line, they're more focused vendors, what we often call best-of-breed vendors or niche vendors. So they are just focused in that one area of the technology. The line that we are focused on today is the purple line, and hopefully you can see my mouse moving up on the screen here. So we're looking at vendors like ExactTarget, we're looking at vendors like Marketo and Aprimo, etc. And we're going to go through some of these as we talk about this various pieces of the market. So we'll go through that and specifically focus on that line, but there is some crossover. So when we talk about vendors like Adobe or Microsoft or OpenText, they don't just sell marketing automation technologies. They don't just sell other aspects of marketing technology specifically. They also sell your digital workplace technologies. They sell portals, for example. They sell lots of other sorts of systems. So they don't necessarily specialize in this area. So we're going to talk about that quite a bit over the course of this particular webinar. So as I mentioned, we're focused today on the digital marketing landscape. We hone in on that specifically with marketing automation and what we call social media monitoring and intelligence. And we'll define these more specifically in a moment. So I've honed in here on this slide specifically on the purple line that I pointed out on the last image. And I already named some of these vendors, but we deliberately put certain vendors on certain ends of the line here so that you could see what sorts of offerings they were. So the marketing automation vendors are in the top bubble there, and the social media monitoring and intelligence vendors, the ones that focus more on that, also a lot of aspects of analytics and what they do are on that end of the spectrum. And we'll get into a more detailed definition of what this means in a moment. So as we talk about this particular marketplace, and also as we talk about selecting email automation technologies, social media monitoring technologies, you need to think more broadly about what is your digital marketing recipe. You should never make a selection for a technology that's out of context. And what I mean by that is that there is a total customer experience that you are trying to create. It's not just about marketing to that customer, it's also about what exactly are you trying to get them to do, and will the subsequent technologies support that once they become a customer. So thinking about that total customer experience often involves many different technologies across lots of different marketplaces. Coincidentally, these are the marketplaces that we cover. So even though we're focusing in these two areas today, I just want to make sure that you put it in this larger context. So hopefully you or your organization has a very specific customer experience strategy that you've put together, and that as you think about the components of that strategy and the entire path that you take a customer down, you're also thinking in a complementary way about which specific technologies support the different parts of that experience. So just keep that in mind as we talk about this market, and make sure that you're thinking about this in your organization. And if someone isn't thinking about it, maybe you're the person to be thinking about it. Maybe you're the person to take that role and become the customer champion and think about this from an end-to-end perspective. The reason this is important, and as we think about these specific technologies, is because we need to think about the content for the total customer experience. So even though we're focused really in many ways on prospects when it comes to marketing technology, we're thinking about people who maybe aren't customers yet. And then once they are customers, how do we market to them more effectively as we learn more and more about them? Usually, we're not thinking about that whole end-to-end content experience. You can't have a narrow view of content anymore. You can't have a narrow view of data anymore. It's just not enough to really achieve what you might want to achieve. So you might be a product company that has packaging. You might be a company that has a catalog that publishes with a big catalog with lots of products in it, either printing it or putting it online. You probably have a very rich website that has a lot of different content that might be different for prospects than it is for your existing customers. You might also have a mobile web experience where you want people to be able to access your content wherever they are on whatever kind of device. You might also even be creating immersive user experiences where you have your brand out there in a kiosk or on a truck or in some kind of pavilion at a show. And that's what these examples are here to demonstrate. So this is just to further put it in the context for you that when we're talking about the very, very specific pieces of technology around marketing automation and around social media monitoring, it's in this larger context. So thinking about supporting that total customer experience and getting people to these different points along the path. So when we talk about digital marketing scenarios, what exactly are the use cases that these technologies are addressing? So specifically today with marketing automation, social media monitoring, here's how we break it down. First, you have to think about what is your marketing objective? What are you trying to accomplish? Do you want to understand what's being said on social media about your brand? Do you want to know what's being said about your competition? Maybe what you are learning about what your customers are saying? Or are you trying to support customers on social media based on what they're saying and engage them through social media? Or maybe you're trying to nurture leads. Maybe you get information about customers and you're bringing that data in, and then you're trying to offer them certain incentives based on what you learn about these customers. And then maybe once you get them engaged, you're trying to nurture and manage those leads and get them to be customers, and then continue to build loyalty throughout that process. Also, there might be a certain channel emphasis that you have. Maybe you're specifically focused on email. Perhaps you're trying to run mobile campaigns that are based on geographic location of where a person is or what they recently bought. Maybe you're trying to do social media campaigns, or maybe you're trying to communicate across a whole bunch of different channels at the same time. This is how we evaluate these systems. This is the lens that we look at these systems through. And so as we interview people who are using these systems, as we look at the vendor tools very closely under the microscope, this is the context that we evaluate them in and that we rate them in within our research. So let's explore a little more deeply what these things really are. So to define what social media monitoring technology really does. As I mentioned already, it monitors what people say about your brand, and you can do that based on entering certain types of data, specifically the name of your company, the name of your products, or any other sorts of keywords that you might want to be out on social media tracking in different ways. It allows you to benchmark your offerings against competitors, allows you to gather feedback, allows you to resolve customer complaints. So I don't know about all of you, but I'm somebody that when I'm upset with a company, I will often go to Twitter and I will say that and I will get their attention, because usually just sending the email anonymously to some customer support group isn't adequate. But if you're out there, out in public, and when you have a couple thousand followers, you get the attention of the company pretty quickly. So part of what social media monitoring allows you to do is to immediately get an alert or some kind of data when a customer is complaining about your products. Allows you to gather competitive intelligence, find out who's influencing your brands. So if you have certain champions out on social media who are saying perhaps great things, you can cultivate that, or negative things, you can address it. Allows you to increase leads and run campaigns. So that's what these technologies are really focused on. Marketing automation. What does marketing automation do? Well, it's a little bit different. So once you get this information about customers, about prospects, etc., you can cultivate that information a little better. You can build, enrich, and promote leads to what is now your marketing database. You're gathering this information about individuals who might have responded to a campaign, or perhaps anonymous prospects who visited your website, or maybe you got the information in some other way. There's two sort of ways that we could look at this. First is the B2B scenario. Marketing automations, they usually serve to help qualify and nurture these leads. So you might be working with some sort of Salesforce automation tool or a CRM tool. These technologies are usually connected to those. If you're in more of a B2C scenario, marketing automation is more generally highly specialized in a certain way to do offers, arbitration, whatever sorts of transactions you're trying to drive. If you're a retailer, it's a sale, and you might be pushing digital coupons out to some sort of consumer group that you've identified. So in this case, it's very, very much tied into what you know about your customers and being able to drive sales based on that, or drive offers based on that. I'll just pause here, and please feel free to start putting in your questions as I start to go through these technology definitions. If you need clarification on any of them, just feel free to pipe in. So as we think about this funnel and the different technologies that you might be using to support this funnel, lead generation is not really something that we're necessarily focused on today, but it's a big piece of this overall digital marketing equation, where you're probably doing things like SEO and making sure that your products and services are findable on social media, on search engines, etc. But once you start to capture those leads, that's where these technologies tend to really start to be more effective. You start generating things like landing pages. You can manage landing pages in marketing automation technology. You can create forms that will allow you to gather information from a customer or a prospect and put that into this technology, so that then you can automate emails and campaigns based on that information. This is part of the nurturing process. Once you start to gather more and more information, you can have more specific email campaigns. You can integrate with where these particular prospects or customers are active on social media. You can then start to slice and dice the data around these different groups, segment, personalize, and really continue to target them in various environments and various channels. And then finally, the qualification process. Many of these technologies actually allow you to score leads and prioritize them. So if you have a sales force that's following up for you, you will be able to subsequently look at how the leads got prioritized based on various criteria that you can specify prior to even starting to gather these leads. So as the data comes in, the more data you have, the richer the lead, and the more specifically you can score it, prioritizing. You can also have certain sentiment analysis if it's social technology. And you can also make all of this part of an analytics tool, either by taking the analytics you have from these tools themselves and rolling it up into a tool that correlates the data, or you can get specific analytics from within an individual marketing automation tool or social media intelligence tool and look specifically, for example, on analytics of positive or negative in terms of what's being said along your brand. I should say about your brand, pardon me. I see questions coming in. Thanks very much. We'll get to those very shortly. So when we talk about the contrast between marketing automation and social media monitoring, some of these tools do have some overlap in the sense that they're helping you run campaigns, they're helping you to do engagement in social media, but there's also some specific separation, and that's what we try to capture here a little bit, specifically with being able to score leads and to be able to do integrated campaign management. That's really where the marketing automation tools come in. And the social media monitoring is more for the gathering of information that allows you to do more of what's on the left-hand side of the screen. So we just want to make that a little bit, hopefully a little bit more clear as to what the distinctions are. Let me just address a few of these questions here because they are relevant to the slide here that I'm on, and also the prior slides. So before we get too far away from these, I'll just address a couple of these. Someone asked, how relevant is marketing automation for B2C scenarios? It's extremely relevant for B2C scenarios. Marketing automation, if you are a consumer-based organization, is something that really tends to drive customer loyalty. It keeps people coming back to your to your site or to your store. You know, we're not just necessarily, let me just go back here, we're not just necessarily talking about you know, e-commerce. We're also talking about brick and mortar types of environments where consumers might have a coupon as they're walking in a specific city that's tied into some sort of, you know, geo-specific information. So it's very, very relevant in B2C scenarios, and it's something that is really top of mind for chief marketing officers today, is to figure out how they can do this better and how they can automate it based on what they've already known about their customers for many, many years, rather than having to make it a manual process. So it's definitely a big deal. And someone else asked, how do data management platforms fit into these technologies? That's a great question, and it's a big pain point for a lot of organizations. So I went back to this funnel slide here, because the funnel, oftentimes what you'll find is that different data is managed by different platforms at different parts in this process. And that's part of why it's very, very difficult to take prospects and customers down through this funnel if the data is not communicating. If you have lead data versus customer data, it's often in completely different databases. You might have customer data in a CRM system, and you might have prospect data in a Salesforce, for example, or some sort of sales tool where you're managing prospect data. And passing that data on as you're moving somebody through the funnel, being able to segment and slice and dice the information you have becomes more and more challenging the more data that you have. So depending on where that data is being stored, you might have to use it at different parts of this process. And the question is, what is going to be the system of record? Not just for the prospects, not just for the customers, but also your content that you need to correlate to what you know about those prospects and those customers. So there's a big piece of this. It's something that we're talking with many of our subscribers about right now, about how to make that sort of situation resolvable, because oftentimes there's just no connection between these data platforms and these marketing automation tools. So you should definitely be thinking about that if you're not thinking about it already. All right, I see more questions coming in. Let me continue with the slides here, and then we'll get to the other questions as we can. So I talked about how digital marketing technology is in a larger context, and this is really meant to show you all the different vendors that are involved in this marketplace in terms of the broader digital marketing marketplace. So the two areas of focus today, where we're talking about marketing automation and also social intelligence or social media monitoring, these are the vendors up here. And as an analyst firm, we're very, very focused on categorizing vendors in different ways, categorizing technology in different ways, and that's what this is meant to do here. And you'll see there are some duplicate names in the different cells. Adobe is a good example where they offer a marketing automation technology. They offer a digital asset management technology, as well as a web content management technology. And that's those vendors, when we looked at the subway map, or the hubs in the middle. And let's talk about whether there's really any advantages to buying everything from one of those vendors. I'll get to that in a minute. This is just another way of looking at the market. So as we go into very specifically marketing automation and social media monitoring, we can then subdivide it more into these groups. And what we specifically have here is the idea of a digital marketing platform, where you have big vendors that offer very malleable platforms that allow you to customize and do sort of a broader range of the sorts of things I've been talking about. Then we have specific vendors that are more honed in on either social media marketing or social media analytics. So looking at what's going on out in social media and analyzing it for you in some sort of statistical way, versus actually the marketing piece of running social campaigns. And then on the bottom, we have specific vendors that are focused on marketing automation across the board. So they're different from the ones up top, because these are larger vendors that tend to offer a whole bunch of different technologies in addition to marketing automation. But the ones at the bottom are very focused more on the aspects that we've been talking about today. There's no better approach necessarily. It's really just a matter of what sort of vendor do you want to be working with, and of course who is really honed in on your use cases. So I talked about that earlier, and also who really understands your industry, your goals, and what you are trying to accomplish. Okay, so let's talk specifically about choosing. Now that you've seen sort of what these technologies are, what the options are in the market in terms of vendors that are offering it, how do you make the decision on what to choose? That is what we will talk about for the last few minutes here. There's not a perfect technology. We say that often. People often ask us, is there a best of breed in each category? Where does it make sense to integrate? Or is it better to select a suite of products, meaning go with one vendor that sells lots of different products? And the answer there is, again, there's not really a better approach necessarily. However, we would caution you about the idea of buying a digital marketing suite. So many of the large vendors out there that you've all heard of, like IBM, Adobe, Oracle, they have done a very good job of acquiring digital marketing technology vendors in recent years. And they have put them together into a packaged offering that they're very happy to sell you everything under the sun and the kitchen sink in terms of marketing technology. But we would caution you in that these technologies, again, were not built from the ground up by the vendors that sell them, and they are not particularly well integrated at this very, very early stage in terms of the life cycle of adopting this technology. So you can go to Oracle, you can buy their commerce, you can buy their web content management system, you can buy their marketing technology, but you still have to do quite a bit of work to connect the different pieces. The same is true of Adobe, who gets an amazing amount of attention right now in terms of all the different markets that we cover at Real Story Group. But again, mostly acquisitions, mostly not built from the ground up, mostly not integrated. So still a lot of work to do there. And as the very astute gentleman who asked the question about data management systems earlier, that's still a big piece of this. So understanding where your data is, how it's stored, how it's structured, how is it going to work with these tools is something that frankly the vendors that sell this technology don't really address very well. They often want to avoid that topic because it's very evident how challenging these sorts of implementations will tend to be. So, as I mentioned, you have to be cautious when you're buying from these particular vendors. You will hear a lot of sexy words. The things on the left are meant to be, sort of a little bit funny, because that's what salespeople will come in and talk about. It all sounds very good. It all sounds very sexy. But the reality is, a lot of the success of what you pick I should say, a lot of the success of your implementation doesn't necessarily get dictated by the technology itself. It gets dictated by things that are listed on the right, such as, what's your workflow? Do you have content models, and do you have taxonomies to really help these things work? And the reality is, many people think the technology is going to solve these problems, and it doesn't necessarily. So make sure you ask about the things on the right as well as the things on the left, and also for the things that are not inherently part of the technology, things like version control are obviously things like APIs. That's part of the what the vendor offers. Make sure that you're thinking about everything else that you have to plan for and that you have to manage, because that's a big piece of it. Technology selection is all about fit. If you've attended our webinars before, I'm sure you're familiar with this particular slide because we use it a lot, but it's very, very relevant. There is no best vendor. We don't believe in that approach at all. It's about finding the right fit for your situation, your organization, your budget. We have a methodology that I'll just go through briefly, and then I'll address more of your questions that are coming in very rapidly right now. Our methodology is real story vendor procurement, and this is what we guide organizations through. The part that I will very specifically focus on, because if you're not focused on it, you definitely should be thinking about it, and that's developing scenarios. So I talked about scenarios. That's how we evaluate the vendors, but oftentimes that's a step that just gets missed because people make a very, very long list of requirements. They'll send out novels to vendors, and frankly, it's a large waste of people's time to have spreadsheets full of requirements that vendors will generally answer yes to over and over again, because with enough time, money, and aspirin or ibuprofen, depending on your painkiller of choice, you can definitely do whatever you need to do. But in thinking about developing your own testable scenarios, you will get a much more honed in and specific vendor response and selection process. So if you're thinking about this particular process, if you need to pick these technologies, obviously, that's what we are very happy to help you do.